All right. Welcome everybody to the final meeting of the study group on council terms, salaries, voter engagement, participation, and redistricting. So today's agenda is really straightforward. We're going to just finalize the cover letter report that we're submitting to council. Ken has some additional strike throughs to go over that were updated just now on board docs. So make sure that you're looking at the most recent version of all of this. And yeah, and then we'll get going. But first things first, does anybody have any changes to the minutes from last meeting? All right. I am not seeing any issues. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion to approve.
All right. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All right. All in favor say aye. Raise your hand. Thank you. All right. Minutes are approved. And we will get to the business now of talking about the draft report. So Ken, do you first want to talk about the items you were mentioning?
Sure. Ray, could you give me screen sharing abilities here? And I'm going to briefly run through what we believe, based on the notes from last time, to be the changes to the pros and cons list. And just while we're doing this, I would like to say that I've made a couple of tweaks. None of them are particularly substantive because I was able to recover some notes that I'd left in my office that I didn't have with me at the time. Are you guys seeing the presentation screen now? Yes? Not?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so this is revised, and the revisions are highlighted in blue text, and I've added some underline and strikeout. Some of this is just moving stuff from one place to another, and then there was a couple of additions and some clarifications of some of the text. So we'll start with scenario one, and just for a refresher, this is the map, moves the one precinct, actually moves the second precinct, but pretty minor changes to the existing status quo. So one change here was this last pro, since it's contingent on whether the council decides to expand the number of districts, was decided that this should be moved to a note at the end. So it's struck through on the pros list. It's no longer on the pros list. On the cons list, and this is something that carries through for all of these, where District C is over target, Chair Lawson said we should clarify that the risk here is future underrepresentation in the district if it grows too big. And so we've added that language there to all of the cons where this shows up. The second change here is that there was no consensus that the move of precinct 0146 represented a clear con. And so this has been removed to the notes section. We've now added notes to our pros and cons list, and so those two things that I talked about earlier had been moved to alternative one notes. I'll pause here and see if there's any questions or comments about these changes or whether anyone has disagreement. Hearing nothing, I'll move on to, well, that's supposed to be scenario two map, but it's not. We'll get that corrected. The alternative two. So no changes to the pros list on this item from what we presented last week. The only changes to the cons list, again, are to add that clarification as to why being over target is a potential con, and to remove the comment about precinct 0146 from the cons to the notes section. We do leave a similar comment for precinct 0125. The study group discussion last week found this to be a different situation because it's in a rapidly gentrifying part of Raleigh and felt like the shift in representation was more significant and represented a con. So the only change here is that observation about precinct 0146 moves to the notes section. Any comments on alternative two? And then seeing none, we'll go to alternative 3. No changes to the pros list. We've added one con. This was a comment that the study group made last week, which is that alternative 3 is the most disruptive in terms of how much it changes the existing boundaries. We add the clarification about the risk of underrepresentation to both District B and District C because they're over target. And then again, we move precinct 146 to the notes. We also they're also added to or moved to the notes a comment that is 4 districts rather than 3 extending in the belt inside the belt line, but the study group felt like neither of those were that was an observation, but not really a pro or a con. And that really concludes all I had in terms of revisions to that list. And the text of the memo covering it has not changed since what you would have seen as of yesterday. So with that, I will conclude presenting.
All right. Thank you, Ken. So yeah, so that language will get updated in that cover letter as well.
It already is.
Are there thoughts about, oh, it already is, there we go, in that most updated version on board docs.
Yes.
Yep. I see that. Harvey.
There we go. My recollection is that we have this in the report. I don't know if we should have it on the slides, which is that the independent groups that reviewed the program did not see that any of the 3 scenarios limited a person of color from being elected, as I recall. That may not be the exact terminology. I think I have it in the minutes as it was stated by the SCLU group, maybe, is that what they were? Anyway, I don't know if that is that's a general note, I think, of interest as they review the pros and cons.
Yeah, so I think that is in the cover letter, and it will definitely be part of, I think, what is put forward to council when I submit this report to them, of just like that being part of the macro, right, evaluation from the different groups that came and spoke to us. All right, other thoughts? All right, let's consider the actual cover letter as well, the cover memo. From a structural perspective, let's just kind of take this piece at a time, I think. Were there any concerns that the recitation of the public charge and kind of the limiting factors for our analysis, any concerns that that was incomplete? Is there something else within those 3 bullets at the bottom of that section where we describe, right, that we understood our task to be limited to review only these 3 maps, that we were not to make any specific recommendations about the proposed maps, but only to provide, right, pros and cons based on community input in our analysis, and that we were also not to include any charge to suggest or to draw ourselves alternate maps. Is there anything else in kind of the parameters of our discussion or our examination of this issue that you think should be included here?
I wonder if there's not value in including the criteria. It's noted that, like, the quote from Councilmember Stewart, it says applying the criteria that I just listed, including perhaps those criteria, and whether that is separate or the same as I think it was 6 criteria that staff used to generate these maps. And that may be included in other places, but I think it's really helpful for people to understand that these are the criteria that either legally or by custom have been considered.
That's a fair point. Let me see. I think that it would make sense to put that. So I will suggest that after the recap of Councilmember Stewart's proposal, and we have that paragraph that says council passed this motion and the study group was asked to serve as a third-party review of those maps, to then add in before that last sentence introducing the limitations on our review, saying staff, or according to the charge from council, staff prepared 3 maps using 6 criteria in their map drawing and then submitted those maps to the study group for review. How does that sound to everybody?
I like that a lot. Do we think, and this might just be my own misremembering, are all of those criteria legal criteria, or are some of them just, like, for example, preserving the communities of interest? Is that a legal criteria, or is that just a traditional?
So all 6 of them have been recognized in law. Not all 6 of them are mandatory, but they are all part of the election law background in which all of this takes place.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think adding that note of it as well is important.
Okay.
It's not just like staff just decided like we should have compact
Right.
districts. Like it's an established
Yeah.
precedent.
I think that's really fair. All right. Does everybody else agree that that addition kind of in that location for this first section makes sense? All right. I've got thumbs up and head nodding. All right. Anything else in that kind of public charge background section that we think should be added or that you think should be removed? All right. Hearing none. So the study group process discussion. So just kind of walk through the background, right, of our public meetings in December, the listening sessions, the email form that people were able to submit to, and then obviously our hearings here in January. Was there anything more about our process that we think that anybody thinks should be included?
I don't know if it's this section or the next or even worth including, but if we had the information on how the public was made aware of opportunities, because I do think there was some pushback initially from the community that people didn't feel like there was enough notice around it. And so if we can either show the number of people who were reached by email or social media or those kinds of things, or just even the outlets that were utilized to connect with people, I think there could be some value in, again, just telling the whole picture. Because when you look at these numbers, we're probably not shocked by them, but they are not high numbers for who turned out for things.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I would agree with that. And it may be an opportunity for Taisha to sort of outline a few comments about sort of the process staff used in the outreach.
Sure. I am also doing a presentation at the same meeting on the 1st about the listening sessions. And I do have a slide in there.
I didn't catch that. Did you try?
Sorry, that was Siri. But I'm sure I can definitely be of assistance. We saw the highest numbers when it was virtual. We're in a pandemic, but sure, I can definitely assist there.
So Taisha, you said you would be making a presentation kind of covering all that process on the same day. So what do people think about incorporating it by reference, or do we want to have that kind of independent knowledge incorporated into our cover letter?
Hey, and sorry, I was joined as a participant somehow, but I'm here, so sorry about that.
Hey, Eric.
For me, I think it depends on how much, the length of that amount of information. If it's a quick paragraph, I think it's helpful to have it so that people can share this memo, this document, and get a complete understanding of the process. If it's several slides or, something like that, it's a little bit harder to condense into something that's appropriate for the memo, then I think maybe reference it is best. But there also may be other information in that presentation that's not necessarily relevant to what this memo is. So.
Okay.
And Catherine, whatever you all decide to do is fine. Just to give you some context for the presentation that is right now on the agenda to be ahead of the redistricting piece. I'm talking about the listening sessions, the outreach, the number of respondents who viewed it, the attendance of the listening sessions, the translation services. I'll be going into a lot of detail around that. And I can condense whatever information you would like to include in the memo, but there'll be I think I have about 12 or 13 slides talking about the listening sessions themselves.
Okay. And yeah, I think that, so Ashton, I think based on what you said, and Harvey, your comment also, that it might make sense to have like a one paragraph version of that information of what the outreach looked like in the cover letter, but then let the rest of obviously Tasha's presentation go into a lot more detail. How does that sound?
I think that makes sense. It sounds like the presentation is really targeted around this specific task. So I think, yeah, especially if we're able to digitally link it to something else so that if the memo is getting passed around, if it's getting shared, people can access that pretty quickly. They don't have to go back and find the council meeting, go to the right point in the council meeting, and then watch all the way through to get that.
Okay. All right. Yes, I think that it would make sense to put that paragraph after, so in the study group process section, after that line that says additional groups are invited to speak but decline the invitation. And then before we get into talking about the in-person and remote listening sessions, to have that paragraph about the outreach efforts. Does that work for everybody?
Yes, I like that. And I think it's an opportunity for us to let council know that their efforts at outreach and Taisha's presence is already beginning to show results.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Additional thoughts for the study group process piece of this memo. All right. In that case, we now get to, right, the bulk of everything. So we have the summary of community input and study group findings. So much of this mirrored, right, a lot of what we looked at last week, because the summary of community input hasn't changed because the community had their input. But was there any changes that people wanted to make to these process criteria or map comments, changing in emphasis? Any real thoughts about this section?
Hey, sorry, this is Eric, and y'all may have covered. I apologize. I was trying to get in, and I did not have a chance to look at this in as much detail. But one thing I don't see in here, and did we specifically call out the interest group folks that presented? Did I miss that?
Under study group process, we list the groups that spoke to us at the December 2nd meeting. And then the fact that Southern Coalition for Social Justice spoke at the December 16th meeting.
Okay.
Yes. And the presentations that we received at those two meetings are part of the
They're
appendix.
attached. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to give everybody a couple more minutes to review this information before we move on.
Catherine, the comments made by Ken in the recent additions, those were generated by us as a committee, but sort of in reflection of we picked up on the trails. But and so we'll get that into the pros and cons. I don't know if there's a place or I don't know if there's a place or, and I'm just thinking out loud, which is always dangerous, but I'm trying to think through whether we're conveying to council that we didn't just simply collect, but we also tried to extrapolate from what we were hearing
Mhm.
in the development of the pros and cons.
Yeah. So part of that framing is in the opening section in the public charge, that second hyphen/bullet point, where we say we were not to make specific recommendation about the proposed maps, but only to provide a list of pros and cons based on community input and our analysis. So we could emphasize that, our independent analysis, our additional analysis. And that's also framing that I will certainly offer to council when presenting this, that I do think it's absolutely true that this is not just kind of a blanket recitation of what were told. There's certainly been additive work that has been done in our discussion as well.
I'm
Probably
going back,
worth
sorry.
clarifying.
Oops. Go ahead,
Sorry, I'm
Ashley,
just going to jump real quick.
No,
In that
go ahead.
sentence, we should probably clarify what analysis of what. So is it our analysis of the maps themselves or our analysis of the comments from people or both? So that just might be a point of clarity in there.
Yeah, so we could say our independent analysis of maps and that public input.
Oh, sorry. One thing okay, so I see now, sorry, again, it's my fault. I found where the groups were, but we don't really break out their comments versus the general public comments. I don't think, and I was thinking that it might be important that, because they have some kind of expertise, so to speak, that the average member of the public doesn't. And I have heard, there's been some comments about, whether we, if there's something that this group is doing or individual members, me in particular, to, somehow sway this one way or the other. And since these groups have some specialized kind of expertise, should we break out some of their comments in turn, because they made some pretty, I think, good comments regarding, that there wasn't an impact on certain groups and things like that. So I don't know if just to give them, I think because they got kind of specialized invitations, I think we heard from them because they had some specialized knowledge, it might be worth breaking some of their comments out separate from the overall comments. But that may be a difficult, so I don't want to overly complicate this either because I know we got some time constraints. I'm not going to it's not going to be a huge deal, but I just make that suggestion.
Yeah, so I have a suggestion on how we could do that in a way that does reflect, I think, some of their, especially like big picture expertise. But one of the, I think, limitations of a lot of the feedback we got, even from those kind of expert civic groups, was very few of them actually delved into, right, the pros and cons of individual maps. They didn't really give us a whole lot of, map A is great for these reasons and bad for these. They focused a lot of their commentary on those overall, the overall criteria and like the overall process. But we could incorporate regarding their sort of like really big picture perspectives, some of the information from their presentations into the individual breakouts of process comments, criteria comments, map comments. So instead of having a section dedicated to what these civic groups thought, incorporate some of the direct quotes from their presentations into the relevant subject matter subsections that we have here on page 3. Because that would be a pretty easy way to incorporate, right, some of the direct language out of their PowerPoint presentations in a way that still sticks with this overall structure that we currently have.
That's
How does
fine.
that sound?
Yeah, I think anything that we can just kind of point to their particular comments is fine. Again, I understand. I don't want to have to force it to get totally rewritten structurally. That's all perfectly fine to me.
Okay. All right. Other thoughts? So beyond the general summary on pages 3 and 4, are there any thoughts on the actual pros and cons? Obviously, Ken just ran through what those changes were between last week and today. So take a look at that kind of final narrative rundown and see if there are any changes.
One of the points, I think on one of the slides, the Southern Coalition of Social Justice, they included a slide, I think, that said something about that none of the maps would, diluted the minority vote substantially or something like that. So,
yeah,
I think
under all
given,
scenarios, we retain 2 majority minority districts.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a good observation from them.
To that point, I know that council is going to want to feel some comfort in not having to get into a process of starting over from scratch, so that the comments by the independent groups, which reinforce the macro, however we pop that out, I'm thinking it and giving council some comfort that they don't have to go back to square one to solve all of the world's problems, or individual problems as part of their consideration. And I'm, again, talking without thinking, but that's just the framing that I would see in that space.
Yeah. Essentially, we have a handful of yellow flags that were raised on some of the maps, but no red flags.
Excellent.
Okay. All right. Does anybody have other comments about this cover memo? So here are the notes that I have based on our discussions for changing it. So the final version of this memo will reflect these 4 changes. First, we're going to add in a second paragraph on that first page at the kind of and we're going to put this paragraph in between the first 2 sentences and the final 3rd sentence of that final paragraph. And it's going to explain that staff were charged and then fulfilled their charge of drawing 3 maps based on 6 legally recognized criteria, and we'll list those criteria. And then we'll say that those maps were then what was considered by this study group. Secondly, we're going to add a paragraph on the outreach methods in the second section after that 1-line sentence starting with additional groups. So we'll incorporate just sort of that big picture perspective from Taisha on what those outreach methods looked like. Third, we're going to change that second bullet point on the first page to say that our independent analysis of the maps and the public input that was received. And then fourth, we're going to add some particular quotes from the civic group's presentations into the body of that summary, particularly focusing on the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. And I believe NC Counts also had specific language saying that all 3 maps retained the existing structure of having 2 majority minority districts. Does that reflect that accurate? Does everybody feel good about those changes? All right, seeing nods and thumbs up. Excellent. All right, well, the appendix is just all the appendix, so everybody can take a look at that. I don't have any comments on the appendix. If anybody else does, speak now. Otherwise, I will work with Ken, I think probably, to put these additional changes in, and then I'll send it to everybody. But I think we can take a vote now on this shared understanding of what the final report will be, and we will be good to go. All right.
Move approval with the changes.
This is second, Eric.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Excellent. All right. Very efficiently done, everyone. Thank you. Then yeah, unless there are other comments, meeting can adjourn.
Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate it. All the hard work and staff and everything. And guess this should be our last meeting in case unless we get another assignment ad hoc, but I don't foresee that. But anyway, thanks everybody. Thanks Catherine for taking over and running this thing and getting it done so well for us.
It's been fun to work with you guys.
Thank you.
All right. Everybody have a good rest of your weekend, and stay dry and warm.
Okay, just a quick thing. Congratulations. Yes. I just want to say congratulations on meeting your deadline with time to spare. I will be working with Catherine to make sure that we get this finalized report with these revisions ready to be posted with the council agenda. So it'll be available to the public and the council members in advance of the meeting. We'll also be summarizing it in yet another PowerPoint and delivering it to the council on February 1st. But just great work. It's been a pleasure on the staff's end to work with you all. So that's all.
You guys have been awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for all your help, staff.